Thank you, John, and many thanks to Father Gruner and all the members of the Fatima Center for this wonderful opportunity to be here today. Immaculate Heart of Mary, pray for us. Fatima, the defining event for the Church in the third millennium. The third secret, an either-or proposition, and we're now living in the or. The coming chastisement, your worst nightmare multiplied exponentially. These are the words of Father Malachi Martin, Roman Catholic priest, born in County Kerry, Ireland in 1921, entered the Jesuits in 1939, ordained in 1954, appointed theological advisor to Cardinal Augustin Bea before Vatican II, entrusted with missions by Popes John the 23rd and Paul VI. Father Martin left the Jesuits in 1964 with the permission of Pope Paul VI, who gave him faculties to function as a secular priest outside the normal diocesan structure. His letter of authorization from Pope Paul VI was accepted by Terence Cardinal Cook when he moved to New York City. From 1966 until his death in 1999, he wrote 17 books, mostly about the Catholic Church, its condition, and its problems. He offered exclusively the traditional Latin Mass, which he celebrated every day. I am aware that Malachi Martin remains a controversial figure. While I am not in a position to prove anything about him, I do challenge any of his critics to match his record of conversions and fruitful evangelization. Countless souls testify that they were led to the Catholic Church by Father Martin. Not only Christians, but non-Christians and even atheists. Because of his efforts, fallen away Catholics returned to the practice of the faith. Lukewarm souls became fervent daily communicants, and Novus Ordo Catholics discovered the traditional Mass. Around New York City, where he lived, I personally know people whose lives were put right through his counseling. He encouraged troubled souls to contact him and was exceedingly generous with his time, conducting lengthy, ongoing handwritten correspondence and making himself available for follow-up calls and face-to-face meetings. Many more people all over the country trace their metanoia to hearing one of his recorded talks or interviews, particularly his appearances on Art Bell's radio program, Coast to Coast AM. The importance of Father Malachi Martin to the Fatima discussion is his claim to have read the third secret. He spoke about it all the time. There are some who may attribute his claim to his vivid Irish imagination. But an article came out just this past summer which seems to confirm that he did indeed read the secret. The Italian magazine Chiesa Viva ran a piece in which Father Luigi Villa, who was commissioned by Padre Pio to fight Freemasonry in the Church and was officially authorized to do so by Pope Pius XII, declared that the third secret was contained within the long, rambling, false secret that appeared on October 3rd, 1963 in the German periodical Neues Europa. Certain sentences in that false secret were in the true secret, said Father Villa, who also claimed that Cardinal Ottaviani had pointed out to him which sentences they were and encouraged him to make the information public at the appropriate time. It was this document which Art Bell read to Malachi Martin on May 4th, 1998. Father Martin's comment was, "This is not the text I was shown in 1960, but certain elements in it belong there." Asked whether the person who wrote the document would have been privy in some way to the third secret, he answered, "Yes, it seems that this person would have had a means of reading or would have been given the contents of the secret." His testimony on the Art Bell show was given 15 years before the revelations of Father Luigi Villa. They are both basically saying the same thing. Father Martin added, however, that there was a part of the third secret which was not contained in the Neues Europa text. Asked by Art Bell if the third secret were as traumatic as the article he had just read, Father Martin said, "Worse, much worse. The central element of the third secret is terrifying and is not contained in that text. Because what you have read is essentially the extermination by natural powers, and this is not the essence of the third secret, not that which is more terrifying." This corresponds directly to an addendum published by Neues Europa 1 month after their sensational October article, clarifying that they had not been shown the most important part, the quintessence of the revelations of the Mother of God, which forms the basis and conclusion of the third prediction of Fatima. During the 4 years before his death in 1999, it was my privilege to know Father Malachi Martin. Having listened to his interviews and read some of his books, I first sought his advice about the disconcerting changes in the holy sacrifice of the Mass. Soon he offered to guide me spiritually. I then had a rather substantial interaction with him over the next 4 years, during which time he often spoke about Fatima. He believed that Fatima was the most important event of the 20th century and that carrying out its mandate was the most urgent task facing the Church and the world. I had already noticed, listening to his interviews, that when he spoke about Fatima, he spoke with authority, as our Lord's contemporaries had said about his teaching. So during our first telephone conversation, I said, "I get the impression that you know the third secret." And Father Malachi said, "I do." When we met the following week, alluding to his skepticism about the charismatic movement, I asked him sort of kiddingly, "Did the Holy Spirit reveal the third secret to you?" "Oh, no," he said. "I was shown a copy of the third secret at the time Pope John XXIII opened it and sought the advice of a group of cardinals in 1960. One of those cardinals was Augustin Cardinal Bea, and I was his assistant. I then ventured. The third secret concerns the apostasy in the Church, doesn't it? This guess was based on the few scattered tidbits about Fatima that came to light during the lean years of the 70s and 80s and on the reasoning of Frère Michel de la Sainte Trinité in The Whole Truth About Fatima. Quote, "The material chastisements are already predicted in the second part of the secret. The third secret predicts a chastisement of the spiritual order," end quote. To my surprise, Father Malachi responded, "The apostasy in the church forms the backdrop or the context of the third secret. The apostasy is just beginning now. But the chastisements foretold in the secret are very real, physical chastisements, and they are terrible." He then related to me the exchange he had had with Cardinal Bea when the cardinal emerged from the meeting Pope John the 23rd was holding with his advisors, looking pale as a sheet. "What's wrong, Your Eminence?" I asked him. "We've just killed 1 billion people. Look at this." He handed me the single sheet of paper with those 26 lines of writing. Since that day, every word of this text has been imprinted indelibly in my mind, end quote. Cardinal Bea had made the statement about 1 billion people because the Pope had just made the decision not to release the third secret and not to consecrate Russia. I asked Father Malachi if he could tell me anything further about those terrible chastisements which would kill 1 billion people. He explained that before being shown the secret, he had been required to take an oath not to reveal it. But he did believe that it should have been revealed and that our Lord and Our Lady wanted people to know about it. Therefore, he mentioned the third secret whenever he could. He would talk around it, giving as much background information about it and as many hints as he could about it without revealing the actual text. Thus, he proceeded to rattle off very quickly a list of possible calamities and said that some of these were in the secret. Although the list included such things as World War III, the death of the Pope, and the 3 days of darkness, it was not particularly enlightening, since not all the coming chastisements were on the list, and not everything on the list would be in the chastisements. Then he said, "You see, there's going to be a new form of energy. The important thing about this new form of energy is that it will be very cheap. So cheap that it could supply the needs of every man, woman, and child on earth if it were in the right hands. But it is not in the right hands. It is in the hands of those who will use it to kill and destroy." I then asked, "You don't mean our country, do you?" And he said, "No, America is evil. We are guilty of many sins, but we are not that evil. Not evil enough to deliberately kill 1 billion people. We wouldn't do that, but they would. And who are they? He wouldn't tell me. Which countries will be hit hardest? He said the chastisement would be worse in some places than in others, but that no one will be able to avoid it. And will it be possible to live through the chastisement? Yes, he said thoughtfully, but in the greatest misery. And how are we to tell when these things are about to happen? Keep your eyes on the skies, he said, an admonition he would repeat many, many times. Like the effect the words of the third secret had had on Father Malachi, The content of this conversation would remain indelible in my memory. After that day, I felt I would never look at life the same way again. During the years that I knew Father Martin, he often elaborated on the information he gave me that first day. For instance, he actually said that we could mitigate the severity of the coming chastisements if we knew the content of the third secret. We also used to discuss things he had said publicly or written in his books. In his book, The Keys of This Blood, he writes that Lucia's one-page formulation of the third secret covers three main topics. One, a physical chastisement of the nations involving catastrophes, man-made or natural, on land, on water, and in the atmosphere of the globe. Two, a spiritual chastisement consisting of the disappearance of religious belief, a period of widespread unfaith in many countries. Third, a central function of Russia in the two preceding series of events. In fact, the physical and spiritual chastisements, according to Lucia's letter, are to be gridded on a fateful timetable in which Russia is the ratchet. End quote. The secret was presented as an either-or proposition, he said. The Pope of 1960 had the obligation to open the secret, read it, and do what it said. This was the either. Pope John the 23rd refused the either, and so we are now living in the or. The spiritual chastisement apparently began very soon after 1960. As a result of the Holy Father's refusal, Father Martin said, quote, "Cardinals, bishops, and priests are falling like leaves into hell." Quote, "Faith will disappear from countries and continents. Many of the elect will lose their faith. People who now believe will give up in despair. Things will get so bad that if Our Lady did not step in, no one would be saved." End quote. Sorry. Father Malachi had told me that the apostasy in the church was the backdrop or context of the third secret. But he also said that the spiritual chastisement was part of the punishment God would inflict if Our Lady's requests were not obeyed. In this connection, he often said something quite disturbing. God will withdraw grace, he said. This sounds like a very harsh thing for God to do, as if he were sabotaging his own will that all men be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. But it should rather be thought of as a vicious circle. When the Holy Father refused to reveal the secret and refused to consecrate Russia, he forfeited the graces he would have earned for himself and the Church by his obedience. And apparently, he was also punished for his disobedience by being given less grace than he had been receiving previously. Whenever a priest, a bishop, a cardinal betrays Christ, subverts the faith, invalidates a mass or a sacrament, forsakes his beautiful vocation, or sullies it by evil deeds or culpable omissions, there is that much less grace in the treasury of the Church. And if you multiply each such offense by all the thousands who did such things in the years after 1960, it adds up to a huge deficit of grace that should have been there. It's a downward spiral. The deficit keeps growing. it gets harder and harder to do good and to avoid evil. Father Malachi compared the flow of grace to electricity flowing through a city. When there is a power outage, everything stops. In the same way, after the great disobedience of 1960, the church was emptied of its power. Convents closed, priests left, mass attendance plummeted. Every measure of Catholic life precipitously declined. This downward spiral will end only when the Holy Father consecrates Russia. But with the continuing depletion of the reservoir of grace, it gets harder and harder for him to do it. When I first asked Father Malachi why Pope John Paul II, with all his devotion to Our Lady, had not consecrated Russia, he said, he didn't get the grace. Another part of the spiritual chastisement which he often mentioned was, Satan will gain power even in the highest echelons of the church, end quote. The strongest statement of this kind came from a caller on the Art Bell show, who said an old Jesuit had told him, quote, the last pope will be under the control of Satan, end quote. Father Martin responded that this man, quote, would have had a means of reading or would have been given the contents of the secret. And yet, he said, the quotation was imprecise. That is because no one was allowed to quote the secret exactly. But even if the last pope will be under the control of Satan were an exact quotation, Father Martin had at other times qualified two prime components of that sentence. The last pope, he often said, did not necessarily mean the last pope before the end of time, but the last pope of these times. Could that mean the last pope before the consecration of Russia? And then the expression, under the control of Satan, can have various meanings. Father Martin used to explain when talking about demonic activity and exorcism that there are several ways Satan can control a human being. He can possess the person, either partially or perfectly. The person could have sold his soul to the devil in return for some favor. Or Satan could so thoroughly control the people and circumstances surrounding the person that the person can get nothing done that is contrary to the will of Satan. Pope Benedict's lament to several visitors to his papal office that my authority ends right at that door makes one wonder how close the church has already come to that scenario. We can see that the spiritual chastisement has already been building up since 1960. Eventually, this deficit in faith and virtue will be the backdrop for not just one, but several physical chastisements. This terrible punishment, he said, will not come without warning, but only those already renewed in heart, and that would probably be a minority, will recognize it for what it is and make preparations for the tribulations that will follow. Did he tell us anything about this warning? In 1997, he told interviewer Bernard Jansen, I think the big factor is what happens in the skies. Keep your eyes on the skies is a prudent motto. I think Our Lady's sign is going to appear in the skies soon. I think it's going to come as a shock to everybody. I think the church is going to be hit hard by what appears in the skies. Keep your eyes on the skies was advice Father Martin gave often, but especially during the first half of 1997. For some reason, he expected to see Our Lady's sign, as he called it, appear that very spring. Someone asked him if it might be Hale-Bopp, a small comet that made an appearance that year. No, he said, he was expecting a different kind of sign. When it didn't materialize by the end of June, he told me, "That means it won't happen for a while yet. We have a little more time." What kind of sign was he looking for? Was it Our Lady's sign in the sense of a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet and on her head a crown of 12 stars? Or was it Our Lady's sign just because she told us to look for it? Was it a specific sign mentioned in the third secret, as the second secret had told us to look for a night illumined by an unknown light before the outbreak of World War II? Ironically, within a year after Father Malachi urged us, "Keep your eyes on the skies," a new phenomenon did start appearing in the skies overhead. It may not have been the sign he was looking for, but it might still have some significance for the chastisements of the third secret. In the summer of 1998, I mentioned to Father Martin that for the first time in my life, I seemed to have no energy. I was completely exhausted much of the time. He said, "Don't worry, it's not you. They're doing something to the atmosphere. We just have to go on." I began to watch the skies in earnest. Every few days, a group of planes would leave a checkerboard of long white lines in the sky by spraying some fluffy white substance which did not evaporate. If one continued to look up and watch what happened, the individual lines would widen and merge with each other until they formed a continuous web of artificial cloud. This activity, while sporadic at first, eventually took place almost every day in every place, creating a pervasive powdery white haze which clogs our skies on most days. While the process was easy to observe at first, today the persistent haze has so shortened visibility that one must almost be in an airplane to see the constant relaying of this striped or plaid pattern behind the permanent hazy cloud cover. Father Martin had told us that the physical chastisements would take place on land, in the water, and in the atmosphere of the globe. He could see that the atmosphere was already being tampered with during the last year of his life. Could they be laying the groundwork for part of the chastisement? Father Martin told radio host Art Bell on several occasions that if someone quoted the exact words of the true secret and asked him if this was it, he would have to say yes. So, callers often did offer texts for his evaluation. Usually, these emphasized horrific disasters like earthquakes, tidal waves, tsunamis, and so forth. Once, after listening to several possible secrets, which he said were not the text he was shown in 1960, he said, quote, "What all these have in common is that they describe upheavals in nature, as if nature itself were rebelling against the human race. Some of these things are in the secret, but remember, when these things begin to happen, it is not nature and it is not God. This leaves two possibilities: Satan and human beings. His description in Keys of This Blood, catastrophes, man-made or natural, on land, on water, and in the atmosphere of the globe, mentions man-made, but gives no hint of overt demonic activity. It also seems to rule out catastrophes coming from outer space, such as the collision of two stars or the approach of a comet. In fact, one caller on Art Bell asked him if the predictions included a comet. Nothing about a comet, he said. When these extraordinary convulsions of nature start to take place, he said, remember, it is not nature and it is not God. It will seem to be nature or an act of God, but it is not. In times past, catastrophes, man-made or natural, would suggest some made by man, like wars, and others acts of God, like earthquakes. But today, considering the vast tampering with our food, the air we breathe, and even our very life processes, catastrophes, man-made or natural, might well mean a combination of the two. That is, catastrophes caused by man manipulating nature and using nature itself as a weapon. Father Malachi's revelation to me that there is going to be a new form of energy which can be used to kill 1 billion people would seem to corroborate this thesis. He had described this energy as dirt cheap, able to improve the lives of everyone on earth, but being used instead to develop weapons of apocalyptic destruction. Although he didn't name this new energy, one, and there may be more, but one that does fit his description is scalar energy. Scalar energy is based on the discovery of a new kind of electromagnetic wave which exists in the vacuum of empty space. These longitudinal electromagnetic waves travel along the axis of time. Time itself can be compressed into energy by the same factor, which is the speed of light squared, by which matter is compressed into energy. So we can now unleash through this new power the tremendous power compressed in time itself. Tom Bearden on his website stated, it's like putting a paddle wheel into a river. The energy acquired is free, since the river is flowing whether we tap it or not. Nikola Tesla discovered scalar energy in 1889. Born in Croatia of Serbian ancestry, he became a U.S. citizen in 1891. He worked for Thomas Edison and received financial help from J.P. Morgan. But when, in 1904, he announced that he could now use scalar waves to transmit energy without wires, he lost the support of his backers. As one of them exclaimed, "You can't put a meter on free energy." Tesla had said, quote, "Electric power is everywhere present in unlimited quantities and can drive the world's machinery without the need of coal, oil, gas, or any other of the common fuels," end quote. Naturally, the powers that be did not want to hear that, and Tesla died penniless in 1943. At his death, the FBI confiscated what writings they could find, and to this day his discoveries have been suppressed. Rather than make his technology available to the public, the government has kept it classified, using it instead for military purposes. About the terrible chastisements threatening the world if we persist in rejecting Our Lady's solution, Father Martin said, quote, "These will start unexpectedly and be accompanied by overall confusion of minds and darkening of human understanding. Whole sections of continents will be washed away forever. Whole nations will perish. Whole nations will lose the faith. Natural catastrophes that the world has never seen before will level humanity," end quote. Once on the Art Bell program, a caller asked Father Martin if the United States is mentioned in The Secret. He said, "Our country is not mentioned specifically, but something very relevant is mentioned." The third element comprising the third secret, according to Father Malachi Martin, is Russia. At every point along the continuum of the fulfillment of these prophecies, Russia was to be the trigger that advanced the process. In his book, Keys of This Blood, which came out before the Iron Curtain fell, Malachi Martin wrote a stunning analysis about the role of Russia. Here are some excerpts. Begin quote. In 1980, Pope John Paul II spoke to a group of German Catholics about the third secret. Why, one questioner asked, did John the 23rd refuse to obey the requests of the third secret? Given the seriousness of its contents, he explained, the Pope explained, my predecessors in the Petrine office diplomatically preferred to postpone publication so as not to encourage the world power of communism to make certain moves. His words, Malachi Martin wrote, point to a mortal danger facing the capitalist nations, about which Lucia is quite explicit in the text of the third secret. The fact that the Holy Father came to that conclusion and made that statement indicates that it must be accurate and based on objective facts. In that third secret, indeed, he continued, Lucia's words are so explicit and so verifiable and therefore so authentic that were the leaders of the Leninist party state to know those words, they would in all probability decide to undertake certain territorial and militaristic moves against which the West could have few, if any, means of resisting, and the Church would be plunged into further and deeper subjugation to the party state. Lucia's words underline a terrible vulnerability in the capitalist nations. The West could be entrapped by the USSR, end quote. This analysis was understandably relevant during the years of communism. But is Russia a danger after the collapse of the Soviet Union? Father Martin was not so sure it did collapse. Many Soviet officials were still in the same positions, having been newly elected to their posts as former communists. Then there is Russia's nuclear arsenal. During the Cold War, we were constantly reminded how many long-range missiles the Soviet Union had pointed directly at us, prepared to unleash Armageddon at the touch of a button. Are these launching sites still intact? Even if the current Russian government has no plan to wage war, there is always a danger of a nuclear accident or that weapons could fall into the hands of terrorists. Even more dangerous than the nuclear threat, Russia leads the world in the development of scalar energy. Most of Tesla's papers had been shipped to Yugoslavia after his death, where they fell easily into the hands of the Soviets. While most Western universities ignored his research because of the threat that free energy posed for big business, The universities of the Soviet Union and its satellites included it. The Soviets used Tesla's technology in their race for military superiority over the United States. In January 1960, Nikita Khrushchev announced that Russia had developed a fantastic new weapon, so powerful that it could wipe out all life on Earth if used without restraint, end quote. Some researchers maintain that the Soviets began using this weapon to attack U.S. military targets and to alter the weather over America as early as the 1960s. The West, having suppressed Tesla's discoveries, found itself unprepared. So while Russia keeps expanding its capability, the American defense establishment has been scurrying to catch up. The most basic scalar weapon is the longitudinal interferometer, or Tesla howitzer. In 1908, Tesla discovered that with the interferometer, he could intersect two scalar wave beams. By this crossed beam technique, giant standing waves can be combined to produce a focused beam of enormous energy. Such focused beams can be directed to intersect on a target anywhere in the world, underwater or in the sky. The violent electromagnetic pulse which hits the target destroys it completely. These beams can also be sent through the earth to trigger earthquakes and volcanoes. Thus, besides being deadly, scalar weapons can disguise themselves behind the forces of nature, leading targeted populations to believe that they have been punished by an act of God, whereas it was really a weapon engineered by man. Scalar pulses can cause storms to gather tremendous strength and become hurricanes and tornadoes, which by manipulating the jet stream can be directed deliberately to targeted locations. Conversely, rain clouds can be sapped of their energy, causing them to pass by overhead, depriving parched and scorched lands of desperately needed rainfall. Considering that Russia leads the world in the development of these weapons, it is crucial to know if there are still hardline belligerent forces lurking in Russia. Malachi Martin was concerned, for example, about whatever happened to the KGB apparatus. In a long exchange with Bernard Jansen in 1994, he said that the communists were not overthrown. Quote, "They withdrew," he said. "We now know that KGB operatives were mingling with the crowds that chanted in the streets. They were orchestrating events. That was no real revolution at all. The KGB had a network of spies, counter-spies, spy masters, informers, couriers, and killers of all sorts. They had gulags, prison camps with wardens, torturers, captains, and slave laborers. What happened to all that? Nobody tells us. Nobody from the KGB was put in prison for the crimes they committed. Nobody was brought to trial. There were no convictions of those who had murdered and tortured all those years in the gulags. Nobody has spoken about it at all. Who has so arranged our media that we are not told the answers to these questions? Even the questions are not raised. Who tells the media people not to mention these questions? Who controls the flow of information so that we do not really know what is going on in Russia? Earlier, Malachi Martin had told Bernard Jansen, while the Soviet Union still stood, the only explanation is that there is a higher power to which we both pay homage. There is a group of men who make both the Soviet Union and the United States possible. And they have worked it out that between these two superpowers, they can corral the world into a new world economic order. Both the Soviet Union and the capitalist West are being directed to produce a godless world, end quote. The same conclusion is reflected in his novel, Vatican, when a high-up KGB official confesses to the main character. We are afraid of that assembly of powerful men who stand above the United States and above the Soviet Union, above everybody. They are a law unto themselves. They want both of us dead, your side and our side. Our real battle is with them, the totalitarian, fascist, international, capital-based group that is 100 times more inhuman than you people think we Marxists are, end quote. Even in his final book, the novel Windswept House, the Masons, the Satanists, enemies of the church of whatever stripe, ultimately have to please a mysterious, shadowy figure known only as Capstone. One day, as we walked along Lexington Avenue in New York, Father Martin said, "We still have our government structures, our democratic processes, our vote, but we are controlled. In the years ahead, the decisions that will most affect your lives will not be made by Americans." In the New World Order, he said, the nation state no longer matters. Everything is global. And yet the New World Order is not so much political as it is financial. He told Bernard Jansen, "Today's geopolitical situation is dominated by one thing and one thing only, the flow of capital and the flow of capital goods. And no country can stand outside that. You must conform to the new geopolitics of trade. You must depend on the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Your whole economy must be geared to the global economy," end quote. The men running the New World Order have allegiance to no particular country. The market is dominated by about 60 or 80 men who decide what nations live and what nations die. They are very, very wealthy and growing ever more wealthy. They have money invested all over the globe. They decide on the value of our money. They tell the President of the United States what to do and what not to do, and he has to do what they tell him. One of the nations impacted by this hegemony of 60 to 80 men over the fortunes of every nation on earth is the tiny city-state of Vatican City. It, too, is under the control of these few powerful men and must do what they say in order to survive. But even more distressing to Father Malachi was the discovery that the church itself had connived over the years with this all-powerful, mammon-serving financial oligarchy. The vast wealth that the church had been able to amass was due in part to its collaboration with its most bitter enemies in financial dealings. Father Malachi maintained that the necessity to submit to the will of these enemies had cost the church its spiritual leadership, so that now it relied on earthly financial power as it had once relied on earthly political power, rather than on the spiritual power given to it by Christ. So disturbed was Father Malachi over this situation that he devoted 3 of his books to the subject. In one of these, the novel Vatican, this collaboration takes concrete form in a document he calls The Bargain, which every pope since the fall of the Papal States had signed. The declared purpose of the bargain was to enable 2 enemies, the Holy See and the Universal Assembly, to engage in mutually profitable business ventures and still remain enemies, end quote. I once told Father Malachi that Vatican was my very favorite of his books. He replied that Vatican was the most autobiographical of all his books. In other words, he had written into the life of its principal character much of his own experience, and presumably also his own convictions. Another title for this book could have been, If I Were Pope, because at a certain point in the novel, there is a conclave at which this main character is nominated for the papacy. I will not sign this bargain, he tells the astounded cardinals, who had never even heard of it, holding up a small piece of paper, which he slowly tears to shreds as he describes the history and purpose of the bargain. He warns, if you elect me Pope, there will be consequences. When I renounce the bargain, the Church will no longer enjoy the protection of the powers that be or the economic prosperity that went along with it. But we will once again be free to exercise the spiritual authority that Christ gave to Peter and to his successors. He let the scraps of paper fall to the ground. Of course, this bargain may be just a literary device, but the underlying reality behind this literary device might go a long way toward explaining why 7 popes, one after the other, would not dare to consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Each new pope reading the Secret is faced with the full horror of the looming chastisements. He must also sense Our Lady pleading with him, calling him alone. All the childlike trust and filial love he has offered her during his whole life, all the graces and courage he has ever acquired will be needed now, because now he must also learn what is so utterly terrifying about mentioning Russia by name in a consecration. Malachi Martin wrote in Keys of This Blood, if there were one dominant element in the 3rd secret, it was Russia. The provisions of the 3rd secret make sense only in relation to Russia. The geopolitical change implied by the 3rd secret was not far off. Russia was its womb. Russia was its focal point. Russia was to be the main agent of change. Russia was to be a source of universal blindness and error. In that secret, the choice between world peace or world catastrophe is described in terms of Mary and Russia. The reform or the mortal deficiency of the Church is also described in terms of Mary and Russia. In the end, we know who will win, for Mary has promised, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. The Holy Father will consecrate Russia to me. Russia will be converted, and a period of peace will be granted to the world. O Holy Mary, may your triumph come soon. Thank you.
I have come to warn the faithful to amend their lives and ask pardon for their sins. They must not continue to offend our Lord, who is already deeply offended. In the final vision on October 13, 1917, Our Lady silently held out the scapular, a gesture which indicates that she wants everyone to wear it.